Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Welcome to part 9 of my review of Masks of Nyarlathotep for Call of Cthulhu 7th edition by Chaosium. In this video I'll be covering the second half of Chapter 5, Kenya. This will include Tarn Kor, the sidetrack scenario with Colonel Endicott's Lodge, the meeting with Old Bundari and the chapter finale at the Mountain of the Black Wind. First we investigate Tarn Kor's tea shop. There are various ways that they could be looking at investigating here. People like Mrs. Smythe Forbes and Jack Brady will mention them. Nestled in the Asian Quarter, Kor's shop is a small building that is well known in Nairobi. Should the investigators watch the shop, they will see with the right roles a few Africans wearing red headbands enter the shop then leave a while later. These belong to the cult of the Bloody Tongue and they are usually bearing messages from Mweru. If they enter the shop to speak to Kor, she'll flat out deny any knowledge, admitting that she spoke to Sir Aubrey but only to sell them tea, noting that he preferred a particularly fragrant oolong, and even offering to brew the investigators some. Accusations towards her will have them expelled out of the shop. Should they set up surveillance of Kor, she has a routine of going to a local cafe for food and playing chess on Wednesday nights with a friend. On Sunday, she journeys into the countryside. The investigators may take this opportunity to gain entry to her shop to have a look around. Should they manage to get in, there will be nothing untoward on the storefront, and her bedroom features Sikhism lithographs. There's a ledger under her pillow, but the only thing of interest is that she ships things to Arja Singh. The storeroom is piled with small chests and bricks of tea, though underneath an empty barrel there's a trapdoor which opens to a short flight of stairs to her cellar. This is all detailed in this map. The cellar smells of death and has a central support pillar, with walls shored up with wood, and there are 3 niches on either side with a candle in. The right skill roll will show a number of overlapping depressions in the floor, the bodies of her sacrificial victims. Against the east wall, there is a crudely carved statue in black stone of a deformed dwarf-like figure with 4 eyes and 4 arms, each wielding a tulwar or Indian sabre. It has 3 large tentacled appendages for feet. This is a representation of the small crawler, an Indian aspect of Nyarlathotep. The central pillar has handcuffs attached to it, and in the northwest corner there is a padlocked stone cabinet. This contains a meat cleaver with a handle of twisted wood that is etched with the symbol of the small crawler. There are 12 cones of incense that, when burned, allow the inhaler to see terrible visions of the planes of the outer gods, which tests their sanity. Inhaling it adds 1% Cthulhu mythos permanently. There's a screw-top jar that looks like it contains fragments of dried fruit peel. They are dull green in colour and they are not vegetable matter. They're actually skin peelings from a dark young of Shub-Niggurath. These are used in the creation of space mead. They taste vile if ingested, though they grant a bonus die to Cthulhu mythos for d6 hours. There's an old book written in Hindi, a copy of the Black Tome, which has an interesting annotation with regard to the solar eclipse on January the 14th, 1926. Lastly, there's yellow robe embroidered with the symbol of the small crawler. Ultimately, there's nothing here linking Kor to the cult of the Bloody Tongue, and going to the police without firm evidence will lead to nothing. However, digging up one of the 15 skeletons here would certainly help. Having a weird basement is, perhaps unsurprisingly, not against the law. Kor will do everything she can to wipe out anyone who discovers her secret, and may even contact Mweru for help. Okay, so following this, we move on to the only sidetrack scenario in this chapter, the Game Lodge. There are a multitude of ways that the investigators could find out about Colonel Endicott, a self-styled great white hunter. He's the owner of a hunting lodge compound and a viewing platform on stilts that purports to offer real Africa to the wealthy and gullible. Sadly for the Colonel, the land surrounding the viewing platform is cursed and very dangerous to those that use it. This all stems from members of the Carlisle expedition spending some time here in 1919 in an attempt to reinforce their story of being in Africa on safari. On the second night, the Colonel drunkenly broke down and talked about his dead wife and child. Houston and Penhew, filled with newfound power after their Egyptian experiences, declared that they could reunite Endicott with his loved ones, and that night at the viewing platform performed some magical experimentation that went horribly wrong. They used a flawed version of the resurrection spell known as Raise Dead, and inadvertently cursed the ground, and corrupted undead revenants emerged from the earth made from dust, bone and debris. Endicott became distressed and had to be dragged back to the compound. When he awoke the next morning, the Carlisle expedition had left, never to be seen again. As a result, he's reluctant to speak of them, and this whole episode is a red herring, as they can gain nothing here. The lodge had come to the attention of the public and press due to a series of mysterious deaths, which seemed to be somehow connected, with Endicott's business suffering as a result. It gives us the dramatis personae of the chapter. Firstly, there is Colonel Henry Endicott, a loud, florid man that stinks of whiskey and desperation. He has a love-hate relationship with Africa, and he's actually insane, which would only be apparent if he were to encounter something that would exacerbate it. He could seem like a desperate lunatic or a sad, doomed figure. The locals either love or loathe him, and he is rarely seen without Mrs. Carruthers, his affectionately named huge elephant gun. The other person named here is Silent Joe, a black African man. He is Endicott's only worker and does all of the household tasks around the compound. He can speak but pretends to be dumb to avoid engaging in conversation. He believes that demons lurk nearby and that the visitors in 1919 did something to free them. The other part of the cast of this section are the revenants. When attempting to call up the dead, Houston and Penhew curse the ground, and each night the wind picks up and dust devils form the debris into semblances of those that died here, including the Colonel's wife and son. They're driven by a hatred towards the living. It then moves on to how the investigators could encounter Endicott. One of the reasons is that they may have already heard about him. They could also have him seek them out for help, but will most likely encounter him at the offices of the Nairobi Star, where their exit will coincide with him making a dramatic entrance by storming in and shooting the ceiling with his elephant gun, and ranting about the meddlesome journalists, claiming that something unnatural is happening at his lodge. He says that Mrs. Smythe Forbes is out to ruin him, inventing a number of reasons as to why, even though the Nairobi Star is reporting the goings-on there for entirely altruistic reasons. Endicott will try to get the investigators to take a look into the matter. It gives us some information on what to do if the Nairobi Star offices have been destroyed, then moves on to what the investigators can find out about the lodge. This can be gleaned from the Nairobi Star and residents of the area, even though Endicott will essentially try and press gang them into looking at it, giving them no time to discover anything. Should they be able to do some due diligence with regard to the lodge, they can discover that since 1919 there have been 12 deaths associated with it, with 10 being tourists. All were on safari in the vicinity, with further investigation determining that they cluster around the viewing platform. The remains have been partially devoured, with some of them being tiny monkey-sized bites, but due to the isolation and condition of the bodies, no autopsies were performed. They can find out that the Boyoiva tribe have long said that people should avoid the area due to big cats and jackals, and that Endicott arrived in 1918 to set up the lodge, though his wife and child died from an unrelated disease. It encourages the keeper to invent untruths to lead the investigators astray. The Nairobi Star has put the deaths down to a rogue lion, though Mrs. Smythe Forbes admits that the locals have told her stories of strange creatures that prey on people, though this is less plausible. She also believes that Endicott is actually innocent with regard to the happenings there, though she feels that it is her duty to warn people. If they speak to the authorities, they will dismiss anything other than lions or jackals as pure gossip, with them even hinting that the Colonel is guilty of neglect due to his drinking, though this is a baseless suspicion. So hopefully with the investigators in tow, the Colonel will whisk them off to his lodge, a rough drive in his truck through the African wilderness. It gives us a plan of both the lodge and the platform and then moves on to the lodge itself. It is close to a waterhole, which is close enough for visiting tourists to watch animals not far from comfort. It has a main house where the Colonel and his guests reside, some outbuildings and the viewing platform which is a few miles away. He will encourage his guests to safari and they can go out onto the platform. From there they can see the likes of zebra, impala, giraffes, lions, leopards and ostriches, with hippos and crocodiles not far away. The compound itself has animal heads mounted on the walls with lots of skin rugs, with a large sitting room and guest rooms and servant quarters at the back. It's very comfortable with fresh water available and food cooked by Silent Joe. The viewing platform is a 3-room hut built on stilts near the Mbagathi River. It has beds, food and water for 3 days, as well as binoculars and a case of Glenlivet whiskey. There are also 2 Lee-Enfield bolt-action rifles and a Webley pistol with plenty of ammunition. It is reached by a badly secured ladder that is an accident waiting to happen. The investigators can view the death site, but all the blood and remains are long gone. Endicott will keep a lookout for the rogue lion so he can bag it. However, none come near. After this, we move on to the events at the platform. During the daytime, it will seem harmless and is built in a beautiful place. Animal bones can be found nearby, and curious prints dot the sand in places. Investigators who want to hunt can. The night time, however, is an entirely different prospect. The best thing to find out what is going on is to stake out the area and stay there, though Endicott is reluctant to stay the night. It will take a hard intimidation roll to get him to stay with them. If they do stay, they will be attacked by 4 revenants. They will silently emerge from the ground and creep up the ladder. Listen rolls can reveal their presence. If they are stopped from entering, they will start attacking the platform's stilts. It advises running them as a nightmarish frenzy. They are incredibly strong and have a voracious appetite. They attack in the early hours and crumble to dust as dawn breaks. If the investigators flee the platform, the revenants will pursue them to the main compound. Silent Joe will stay at the house and can be counted on to keep his head while everything is madness around him. Endicott, as has been explained previously, is insane. He understands that the revenants are a corruption, but also that they are his wife and son, and he may even side with them against the investigators, welcoming the death that they bring. It then gives us a number of ways to deal with the revenants. If they wait till dawn, the bodies collapse to dust, though this does not offer a solution. They can fight the revenants and even use various spells to banish them, or even use the spontaneous Cthulhu Mythos rule to replicate a spell-like effect. Also, if they've already met with old Bundari, they can ask him for help. It would no doubt exact a price, though his magic is strong enough to bring peace to the lodge. Ultimately, the conclusion of this sidetrack is down to what solution they offer. They could either persuade Endicott to leave or try to lift the curse under their own auspices. It gives some rewards for completion here. After this, it details the characters and monsters, and then we move on to Old Bundari. Having been pointed in his direction by Johnstone Kenyatta, they end up following a tall black African man through the streets of Swahili Town. As they follow him, they can become aware that he is watching for people and is mindful of his surroundings. Swahili Town is poor, but the people are good-spirited, and a lot of the houses are single-room and mud-walled. Eventually, the man will stop in front of a yellow-painted door, look at the investigators, then step through. Should they follow him, it leads to a small shed with a yellow Rolls Royce in it. Their guide motions for them to get in, and then they are off along a dirt track a few miles out of town. After around an hour, they arrive at a remote village, stopping beyond the circle of huts. The guide exits the car, motioning for the investigators to stay put. A young man approaches and talks with the man at length, while children gather around the car. After a while, the guide introduces them to Okomu, who will ask them in English why they wish to speak to Old Bundari. If they try and bluff their way past Okomu, it needs a hard, fast talk, and if they fail, he tells them that men of lies have no business with Old Bundari. If they're honest, he accepts what they say and leads them to Old Bundari's hut. His home has the smooth curves of a Maasai hut and is surrounded by a gated fence, with the door being a curtain. Entering the hut is akin to going into a snail's shell, as the passageway winds around the outside towards a central chamber. The walls are whitewashed and marked with fetishes, signs, masks and the like. In the central room there are more signs and sigils arranged in arcane patterns that can be identified as warding symbols, and with the correct roll, some can be related to the outer gods. An old man sits in the room appearing to be dead. As they enter, Okomu will go over and start unfolding his legs and rubbing the circulation back into them, explaining that although Bundari has powerful magic, he has become more conjoined with the other side, and it is Okomu's job to protect him in this reality. He then directs the investigators to sit and wait. After D6 plus 6 hours, he will begin to stir. During the waiting period, Okomu will serve them food and drink, but warns them not to converse, as that would draw him out too quickly. Eventually, he will start to stiffen and swell, and then will open his eyes, studying each investigator in turn. He does not speak English, so Okomu translates. He mentions something truthful from each of the investigators' pasts. He will ask them if they want to hear something pleasant or the truth, and then talks about how the Bloody Tongue have been taking people to the mountain for the blood sacrifice, and invites them to question him. If they ask about the Carlisle expedition, he tells them that the cult of the Bloody Tongue was responsible for the massacre and that they brought beasts from the other side to kill them or carry them off to the mountain of the Black Wind. If they ask about the mountain, he will tell them that a dread god dwells there and that once per year the Black Wind is unleashed, bringing disaster. As a side note, Okomu can draw a map up to the mountain. If they speak to him of the Bloody Tongue, he will tell them that the cult abducts villagers and sacrifices them to their foul god, with it appearing afterwards attended by creatures not of this earth. The god is said to be as tall as a mountain and has a colossal bloody tongue where its head is meant to be, with the mere sight of it driving men insane. He tells them that Mweru is the god's priestess and that she lives in the mountain, and that it was her that prophesied the coming of a child of the god, part human, part monster. If they ask how they're supposed to fight the cult, he will speak of the Eye of Light and Darkness, which could trap the god within the mountain forever, though nobody knows where that could be. If they have part of the sign with them, he grows excited and offers to study it for them to try to divine its usage. He will then go into a deep meditation for D6 plus 6 hours, at which point Okomu will invite the investigators to rest and prepare them a meal. When old Bundari wakes up, the investigators will be called to hear what he has learned. He will tell them that he spoke to a mystic scribe from the Far East called Hassan, who has written 7 books of forbidden yet essential knowledge, and that he had captured the magic of the ward within these 7 books. The books can be found in Shanghai and contain the information needed to create the Great Ward. If they've been gracious guests, Old Bundari has one last thing to help them. He gives them a carved fly whisk and a lizard in a cage. The whisk is a powerful item that helps the bearer to fend off evil, and the creature is something quite unusual. More on that in a bit. It's unlikely that he will accompany the investigators to the Mountain of the Black Wind, and he will recommend finding Sam Mariga, who can guide them there, or failing that, Okomu will. Okomu can be used as a new character should someone die. So then we move on to the lizard in the cage. When the investigators check it out, they will see a strange-looking chameleon-like creature with 3 horns, a vertical mouth, and with each of the 4 limbs being divided into 2. Old Bundari will describe it as "who is not what she seems," or "who" for short. He claims to have found her in a faraway place and says that the investigators can take her with them on the proviso that they feed her well with flies daily and not to open the cage until they reach the Mountain of the Black Wind when they need a friend most. While they keep Who, insects will actively avoid them. Once released from the cage, Who transforms into a monster from the Dreamlands, a Gug. Once freed, Who will become enraged and attacks everything nearby, and if they neglected to feed her, she attacks the investigators too. After this, we move on to the finale of the chapter, and perhaps the campaign if events have played out in a certain order, toward the Mountain of the Black Wind. If the investigators have discovered all of the clues and spoken to everyone, they should now know where the Mountain of the Black Wind is and how to get there, and there is a small chance that Mawero does not know about their presence. If she does know of their presence, then small groups of cultists will be encountered. Cultists worldwide will be making their way to the mountain to witness the birth of the spawn of Nyarlathotep, possibly alongside the opening of the Great Gate. The Mountain of the Black Wind sits in the tropical Aberdare forest, and this has the usual wildlife of elephants, leopards, rhinos and chameleons. These are seen as bad luck by the local tribes. The forest is temperate, with giant cedars, olives and figs thriving, and the mountain slopes are often cool and wet. The lethal green mamba can be found here, alongside puff adders and cobra. The Mountain of the Black Wind, or Mount Satima, is the highest in the Aberdare range. If the investigators use the slopes and trees as cover, they can get to the Mountain of the Black Wind from Nairobi in 3 to 6 days. A day southwest of the mountain is Ndovu village, which can provide shelter before they journey on. However, if they have Samariga with them, he will caution them against talking about their mission. The people here fear the cult of the Bloody Tongue and will refuse to have anything to do with them if they find out that they are looking to fight them. Nobody here goes near the mountain or the site of the Carlisle massacre. So much so that this place is known as the Corrupt Ground. They will give directions though for those who want to explore it. The investigators can learn some gossip here too. They can discover that over a dozen men, women and children have vanished in the last few weeks, presumed to have been kidnapped by the Bloody Tongue. Also, they can find out that 2 elephants were found torn to shreds a few hours east, and vultures and jackals have not gone near them. They can discover that Mawero is said to have cursed a great magician in Swara village who mocked her powers. He is now a wreck of a man who is blind and babbles like a baby. The investigators can actually find this man if they go looking. Lastly, they can find out that the Mountain of the Black Wind is thought of as an evil place, and that sometimes lightning strikes the mountain and foul voices are heard on the air. Turning the page, we're greeted with a full-page map of Mawero's cavern, which we haven't got to yet, and a box out called Dangerous Days. Here it talks about the days leading up to the rituals at the mountain, and will lead to more captives being taken from local villagers, and they rightly want retribution. And it suggests that rather than having an endless queue of ambushes, that the keeper should build the suspense rather than wear the investigators down. It then moves on to the Corrupt Ground. If the investigators want to, they can visit the site of the Carlisle Expedition massacre. As they get nearer to it, the air seems to change. They'll find themselves in a wide saddle-shaped pass and will find the corrupt ground to be blackened. Animal trails go around the area and the undergrowth is disturbingly deformed. The soil feels squishy and the place has a foul stench that pervades. The place feels wrong, and those with 80 power or above will feel a tingling in the air. Those versed in the natural world or sciences think that nothing natural could produce this effect. It is here we find out the details of what happened on that fateful day. The members of the expedition, minus Carlisle and Brady, drugged and bound their bearers and summoned heralds of Nyarlathotep who possessed the bearers and made them rip each other apart. Subsequently, the bodies of the bearers, having been possessed by otherworldliness, were left by animals and wouldn't rot. This effect pervades to this day. Next up is the place where everything comes to a head, the Mountain of the Black Wind. As it is approached, the noise of the wildlife goes quiet, leaving an empty and unnatural silence. The mountain is a sheer rock face with a trail leading partway up that ends at a hidden entrance. This leads to the cave of Mawero, a natural lava tube. At the far end, there is a large statue of Nyarlathotep in its bloody tongue aspect. There is a throne chiselled in the front of it. The throne has a marine chronometer in a box on the floor beneath it set to GMT. This is here to tell the spawn of Nyarlathotep when to begin the ritual to open the Great Gate. Behind the statue is a hidden panel, which opens up to a ramp that leads up to the Great Temple of Nyarlathotep. The cavern also contains 3 mounds, each a pile of rotting corpses and bones, the most recent sacrifices, the odour of which permeates the cavern. There's also an iron cage that will contain 200 prisoners if discovered before the birth of the spawn. After the birth, only 5 remain. Previously kidnapped investigators could be found here with their san obviously shredded. After this, it covers the Great Temple of Nyarlathotep. This mile-long tunnel from Mewero's cavern curves upward with no decoration on the walls, only the occasional torch. After around 30 minutes of climbing, the entrance to the Great Temple is reached. The only other entrance is a staircase that magically appears during important rituals, which is deployed by Nyarlathotep itself, looking like a vast pyramid when it does. The Great Temple has a strange tentacled appearance. The walls are dark and the light dim. When the ritual has begun, the investigators won't be noticed. The room glows with a brown fungus on the ceiling. It has 3 enormous columns that support the roof that writhe of their own accord, and they have iron loops embedded in them. In the centre there's an altar stone that is a bluish mineral not of this earth. It absorbs magic points from the sacrifices made upon it, up to 400, though it only contains 300 currently. If a fragment is broken off, it can act as a magic point battery. Those that are sacrificed on it partially dissolve. There is also 3 sacrificial pits containing ants, snakes and rats. Victims are regularly tossed into them to die an agonising death. There is also a bone pile of recent victims, and upon a day is what is left of Hypatia Masters. This is the throne of the mother, and it has steps leading up to it. She is almost unrecognisable, and she can barely move and is in a really bad way. We then move on to the 3 aspects of the spawn of Nyarlathotep. It can be referred to as he, she or it after it is born, and it can change sex at will. The spawn is to perform the Great Gate opening ceremony on January the 14th, 1926. If Masters is killed before it is born, it tears itself half-formed from her corpse and attacks the investigators. After its birth, it can become an exact double of Hypatia Masters, or a monster form that has a bottom-heavy, roughly triangular body with 2 yellow oval eyes and with a writhing tentacle drooping below. It has 5 fanged, drooling maws, and its hide is a blotchy orange, with lots of appendages each ending in a claw. As it slides along, it leaves a trail of orange vomit. And as if this wasn't bad enough, it is also slightly radioactive. If killed in this form, it stays dead. However, it can switch between the forms of Hypatia Masters and the spawn, which takes a few minutes. It has some of her skills, but none of her memories, and if the spawn is killed, this angers Nyarlathotep. The Mountain of the Black Wind has 2 types of rites that are held here. Firstly, there's the ordinary rites, which are performed at the dark of the moon on the plain in front of the cavern. Nyarlathotep is summoned to bless the sacrifices in the form of the bloody tongue. Hunting horrors and shantaks form an honour guard around their god, and the whole thing is absolutely sanity blasting. The second is the ritual of the birth. This is an extraordinary rite, maybe the biggest humanity has ever performed. Leading up to the ritual, more people are abducted from the surrounding area to boost the sacrificial numbers. Just after dark on the night of the ritual, Mewero emerges and addresses the 1,000-strong throng of people from all over the world who will be dressed to celebrate the birth. After this, the summoning begins. She will tell the crowd in Swahili that this is the night of the dread child and start chanting to the sound of drums. The cultists will start tearing off their clothes in a frenzy and the sky will darken. Clouds will build and lightning flashes and a plume forms above the mountain. The cultists start grabbing the prisoners and hacking at them, their blood soaking the plain. After an hour, lightning strikes the mountain top and Nyarlathotep appears in his sanity-shattering bloody tongue form astride the mountain. It waves its arms and a staircase forms from the plains to the great temple. Mewero leads the throng up the stairs, between Nyarlathotep's colossal legs, as it scoops up handfuls of cultists and crushes them and eats them or throws them to the ground. Investigators need to dodge the god's scrutiny in order to get to the great temple, though they may sit it out and wait. Eventually, after the last cultist pass, Nyarlathotep vanishes, becoming the black wind, which rushes off over the countryside. However they manage to get into the great temple, they will be there to witness Hypatia Masters giving birth to the spawn of Nyarlathotep. Over the next hour, 200 captives are brutally sacrificed on the altar stone or eaten alive in the pits. Eventually, Mewero will call for silence and begin chanting. Her belly will glow and she will start screaming in agony, and then her head will explode and the spawn of Nyarlathotep will emerge, the cultists cheering and dancing in celebration until they fall asleep with exhaustion. The drums will pound and the black wind will howl across the land, with cyclones levelling villages, earthquakes shattering bridges, and firestorms erupting in forests. If the investigators continue to hang around, they will see the spawn shimmer and turn into an exact duplicate of Hypatia Masters, embrace and kiss Meweru, and then leave the cavern. The mountain will rumble, and the mouth of the temple will close, and from this point on, the spawn will be in Meweru's cavern, practicing the Great Gate opening ceremony. It then gives some notes on how to run the ritual. As it explains, this is a big deal for the bad guys, and it should be run in such a way that the investigators have to shift their positions as events change. It suggests that quick-thinking investigators should try to neutralise Masters, Meweru, or the spawn before it can be born, though this is incredibly risky. Keepers are encouraged to reward ingenuity and ensure that at least some of them should escape, because in truth such a huge ceremony will be difficult to influence. It addresses the huge sanity loss for witnessing the mythos creatures and slaughter, but suggests saving the big sand loss for the big moments, and them all going insane effectively stops the campaign in its tracks. It talks of the mass crowds, darkness and confusion playing a part, and it even suggests psychosomatic bouts of blindness in order to avoid the sand loss for seeing some of the bigger bads, and it gives some good notes on adding flavour to proceedings. We then move on to the conclusion. They should, after the ritual, head back to Nairobi, battered and bruised, perhaps wanting to tell the authorities, though it is likely that only Johnstone Kenyatta and Old Bundari will believe them, but colonial society will remain unconvinced. If they are able to cause trouble or stop the ritual of the birth, Meweru will send cultists after them. Kenyatta and Old Bundari will help them flee Kenya. If it ends poorly, they will recruit a team of locals to follow in the footsteps of the investigators. After this, we have the rewards for this chapter, including the reward for the incredibly unlikely reason of them bringing down Nyarlathotep. Finally, we have all of the stats for the good and the bad of this chapter, including some African wildlife, and we have the stats for the monsters and the spawn of Nyarlathotep in each of its 3 forms. Okay, that concludes part 2 of the Kenyan chapter. The next one will be Australia.